Let's continue on the topic then. We're now joined via Zoom by author and Executive Director for Marketing and Communication at the University of Limpopo, Mr. Victor Kgomoeswana, to weigh in on the life and legacy of the Congolese independence leader, Patrice Lumumba. And Tate Victor, thanks for joining us here on SABC News, sir.
Good afternoon, Flo. It's good to see you again.
Let's talk about, I know we're to talk about the legacy of Patrice Lumumba, but before we talk about that, in terms of the handover of the remains, and as we say, it's just a tooth, is this paving the way for something bigger? Do you believe that indeed we need to start talking about the issue of reparations? Are the Belgians now actually in this way admitting guilt and should actually take further steps in fixing what they damaged? And it wasn't just about Patrice Lumumba, obviously.
I have no idea how they are going to fix the mess of King Leopold II. The mess he made in the DRC is immense. Punish grown men for not meeting their rubber plantation quotas, how he enforced his discipline, or in the first place, how one man convinced the United Nations that a country as large as the DRC could be his personal property. But more than that, Flo, the fact that the DRC's GDP is still under $50 billion, whereas Antwerp, a small district in Belgium, which processes diamonds, including those from the DRC, generates the revenue in excess of $60 billion a year. It's a small block of a city in Belgium, which, as you know, has a history of colonial oppression and exploitation. So if the king, and he was very careful to not apologize. Yeah. He said this was wrong, this was an injustice, but he fell short of apologizing because I suspect he understands that apologizing would just unleash a series of class actions and similar things. But in the end, whether or not they apologize, I want to know how they're going to fix the mess they made in the DRC. Because since the independence of the country in June 1960, the country has not known peace.
Yeah. And I mean, the last conversation you and I had was around the resilience of Africa. In fact, you've written a book and you've spoken quite extensively on the resilience of Africa. On the back of all that you mentioned, I mean, all the atrocities that have been committed on this continent, on the African people, on the bodies of African leaders like Patrice Lumumba, how much more resilience can we have, as a continent as we consider all of this? And as you say, we're not getting apologies, but indeed, we're told to forgive and move on.
I agree with you. We are resilient. That's what I believe. That's my philosophy. But the problem is to just be told to forgive and move on. So let me sketch for you the picture, Flo. In 1904, there was a massacre in Namibia, and the Germans took bodies, skulls of Namibians as souvenirs to Germany. There was a movie made by, I forget the South African movie maker, that was released called Skulls of My People. It was about the return of that. Germany paid some reparation. Ethiopia had a similar thing with the Italians stealing or taking some of his monuments. You remember the story of Sarki Bartman. Sarah Bartman was taken more than 200 years ago to Europe as a trade, if you like. She was encouraged she would make more money there, but when she got there, she ended up being exploited. And when she died in poverty, her body was preserved almost like a specimen of an animal. And of course, you know the story of the millions and billions of dollars that were stolen from Africans, deposited in Switzerland, in Swiss bank accounts, that all have to be restored because they belong to the people of Africa. So when we talk about a tooth as a symbolic gesture returned to the DRC, and then a mausoleum being built in the DRC capital, Kinshasa, it's one thing because human beings have to be respected. But the real deal is, I don't see how we can tell the people in the Holocaust to just forget and move on. And if we cannot do that, then we cannot ask Africans to just forgive and move on. And by that, I mean there must be financial reparation for the damage that was caused, because we can quantify it in rands and cents or in dollars.
Yeah. Let's talk then about the legacy of Patrice Lumumba. I mean, you look at what some of the children are learning in history books, and, you rightly have pointed it out. It would be, European history, American history, but so often we don't get enough about our own African history and some, as we say, the atrocities that have been committed on the continent. What are your thoughts in terms of the legacy of Patrice Lumumba and how we should uphold that particular legacy?
We are in the media era. We are in the era of social media, and I would just encourage people to go online and Google Lumumba's last letter. Lumumba's last letter. That's the letter he wrote when he had been captured. He had been dethroned after 2 months and a half in power, and he was about to be assassinated. He knew that he was going to be killed, but he wrote such a powerful letter that has endured since January of 1961. Today, if you read it, you cannot help but be hopeful about the future. If everybody did just read that one letter that he wrote to his wife, Pauline, they will get the picture of what Patrice Lumumba was. Courage under fire, refusal to compromise his principles, even when he knew he was going to pay the ultimate sacrifice. So if there's no of his that we are going to push on to our children, let it be that letter, because it will summarize what the man stood for.
All right, Dr. Victor, pleasure as always. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News this afternoon.